Welcome to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I am here with my co-host, Michael Regan. I am Kathryn Peterson, and we're happy to have you here again. Today, we are going to go through how to have effective meetings. I spend a ton of time in meetings. I'm sure that you do as well, our audience, and I know Michael does. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to make those more effective so you don't leave a meeting saying, maybe that should have been an email. So welcome, Michael. Great to have you again.
Always good to be here. You are right. There is not a single person that will tune in to this episode that does not at some point over the course of their week get caught in a meeting, and probably over the course of a week, a lot of meetings. So anything we can do to better define this experience will hopefully leave everyone feeling like, hey, that was a great choice of podcast for the day. So I'm excited to unpack it.
Absolutely. This is a hot topic, and I think one that will be beneficial because if I have to host a meeting, I try to think through these things, and maybe it will save all of us time by having this podcast. So let's kind of dig into it.
Yeah.
So first, it's kind of how to set up the meeting. So how do you set it up, and how do you even know if you should have a meeting or should you send an email?
So let's I guess put a basic frame on the idea. Often we have meetings because we think we should. That's just, well, we need to discuss something, so let's have a meeting. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, because if we want to put a positive context for that, it means we're attempting to have communication, which I would argue is far better than the siloing of isolating information and not communicating. So I'm all for positive communication, but the way you set that up implies, well, could it have been an email rather than a meeting? Could it have been a phone call? Could it have been a personal, just stop by someone's office and have a quick 5-minute chat? And so I think what you have to look at are a couple of basic things before you get started. One is, what is the purpose of the meeting? I think there has to be some clear definition. Why are we meeting? I think that needs to be stated clearly before you ask someone to join a meeting. You need to be able to define that. Even if they don't ask you that question, that needs to be in the context. Like, this is why I'm having this meeting. And then the second would be, this is my desired end result. This is what I hope we leave the meeting with. If we're just meeting for the sake of discussing, then be clear about that. Meaning, if the end result is, I just want to socialize this idea, I'm not looking to make a decision, I'm not looking to draw any conclusions, I just need to air out this idea in a format or a forum that is safe to do. Perfectly reasonable to have that, clarified as a purpose up front. But I think those two things are ingredients that certainly should exist up front. Then the other half of your question is, could this be done in another way? I think that's always a fair question to ask yourself before you schedule the meeting. Is, if I know why we're meeting, I've done a great, and I know what my desired end result is, I think maybe that third question is just, is there any other way I could get those two things without meeting? And if there is, consider that, because I don't know too many people that are disappointed to find out that a meeting was not necessary. Most people are happy to find out, oh, there was an easier way to do that. Great, let's try that one.
Absolutely. I think that is so true. Eliminating a meeting is a beautiful thing. Okay, so then is there something you send ahead of a meeting to make sure that it's effective?
Yeah, that's something that I personally value quite a bit. So if you and I are going to have a meeting to talk about, our podcast, when you send something to me ahead of time to talk about, okay, we know why we're meeting. We need to prepare for our podcast. We know the desired end result. Hey, we need to pick our next topic. We need to get it scheduled. We need to invite our guests, basic things. And let's say you had decided, yeah, that's not going to work really. Email will be too clunky. That'll be too much back and forth. We can get a lot more done if we just fire up a Zoom line and do it. So now we're having this meeting. It's really helpful if then someone sets an agenda for that meeting, a really basic agenda. And agendas don't need to be, I think sometimes we hear the word agenda and it feels like an act of Congress. The truth is, agendas can be very simple. They can even be literally three things. I mean, they don't have to be complicated, they just need to be clear. And an agenda accomplishes two things. It allows people to know not just what it is that we hope to discuss, but they also know when we've accomplished it. Like there's a sense of, okay, good, we've covered the agenda. Is there anything else? We really can be a lot more efficient when we have an agenda. When we don't, the the risk is we just start rambling. We just start filling the space, and that's usually the kind of meeting people don't enjoy.
Yes, those are frustrating. And it's nice to follow an agenda too, to say, okay, we're halfway done, or we are not going to get through this agenda and we're going to have to plan something else. So you can kind of, as a participant, be able to see where we are. And, oh, I would ask a question, but we're just about to cover that. So I'm going to wait until that section so it can make the time within the meeting more effective to have an agenda too. And I do forget about that a lot. So that's a very, very good point.
Okay, let me give you an example of that because I
Mhm.
just as you were riffing on that, it brought to mind a meeting that I'm going to be having next week. I serve as a board member for a couple of nonprofits that I'm involved with, things that I'm passionate about. I think you know this one. I've talked about the foster care home that we run here in Arizona, and I promise we won't use the podcast as an advertisement for the Firm Foundation Youth Homes, but you could probably Google that and find out about us if you wanted to. The board meeting that we have, there's a fiduciary responsibility we have as board members to meet on a regular basis. Because we are a state-sponsored agency, meaning we receive funding from the state of Arizona to help subsidize the cost of running this house, there are certain things we have to do legally by requirement. So these regular meetings and the agenda that is put out for these meetings is somewhat perfunctory because we have to accomplish certain things. Well, we've got a meeting coming up in a week in which a pretty big decision needs to be made around a pretty significant research project we did. And the time it's going to take to unpack that will easily eat up this whole meeting. And you just made that example of, hey, if we don't, we may not have time to finish all of this. We already see that ahead of time. When you're really good about preparing agendas for meetings, you start to realize we are squeezing an hour's worth of content in a half an hour meeting, or in our case, 2 hours worth of content into an hour meeting. And so what you start to do is you start to make some really strategic decisions about what do we accomplish in this meeting and what could we accomplish next. Guess what came out of that seemed so obvious in hindsight? I challenged our board director and said, look, we have a minimum number of meetings a year that are required by the state, but we don't have a maximum. Why don't we have this meeting to get the things done that are critical to the time frame here in May and schedule another one in June to cover those other items? That way we're not asking one to sit for 3
Mhm.
hours and try to knock all these out. Let's hit these today. Let's hit those in another few weeks. That wouldn't have even been possible if our meetings were run without agendas, because we wouldn't have known ahead of time. We would have just dived into the meeting and said, okay, the first thing we need to talk about, and before you know it, we're all trapped for hours. And then people start thinking, why am I serving on this board? I don't have time for this. And
Mhm.
we all leave with this, I'm sure someone listening is like, oh, I've been in that board meeting
Yeah.
or that team meeting. So your question, or your comment, I should say, is really important. Is we need these agendas because they not only help us prepare, but they might help us figure out what doesn't need to be in the meeting or what could be done later. Or back to your first example, we're going to peel that one off and we'll just socialize that over email. Lots of options are out there.
Yeah, that's great. So it sounds like agenda is a key ingredient of a meeting. What do you think are some other key ingredients of a meeting?
So I'll use coaching sessions as an example of this. They're not the only example, but you can see where they're going to apply from what you and I have experienced, and what they might look like in other formats, because I've run lots of team meetings over the years. I find there are five key ingredients that I'm looking for in a typical meeting. And we can talk a little more if you'd like about different types of meetings, but let's consider this type of meeting to be the regular meeting. So in your world, that could be the regular pipeline meeting. Okay, that's
Mhm.
something that has to happen on a regular basis. We have a certain number of clients that are under contract, and we need to synchronize between our operations team, our sales team, and our customers over what's going on. I think these five things are really important. Number one is, I think if you can schedule a day in which that's always the day for that meeting, consistency around the day matters. Number two is consistency around the time matters. So if it's going to be on Tuesdays at 10 a.m., when we keep it Tuesdays at 10 a.m., guess what? We develop a cadence, we develop a rhythm. People work their schedules around it. So I think the day, the time are there. We talked about agenda. So think about the content of that agenda will always be unique, but what if the framework for the agenda was always the same? These are the things we cover. Again, in a pipeline meeting, these are the new applications that have come in. These are the new contracts that have come in. These are the closings that we have scheduled in the week ahead. Just simple things that keep the framework of that. So that would be the third. And then I think the final two should hopefully be obvious, but boy, do they matter. Start the meeting on time and end the meeting on time.
Yes.
If we can get those 5 things done consistently in our regular meetings, it elevates the experience in which people are likely to not only come prepared, but also engage. If we don't do those things, and I mean, even if we don't, maybe we do 2 of them, but we don't do 3, people start to get frustrated. They start to tune out, and eventually the meetings become very ineffective. So those are my 5 ingredients to a successful meeting, and I try to keep them simple on purpose because I don't want them to be complicated. I want people to say, well, that makes sense. What time does our 10 o'clock meeting start? Oh, yeah, it starts at 10.
Yes. And I think a really important one is to also watch the time throughout, because I do think that occasionally someone will get the podium and get off track, and all of a sudden it takes more time and you've missed spots on the agenda. So what do you do
Yeah.
if a meeting really starts to get sideways, or you start diverting to a different topic that isn't on the agenda, or that we know is going to take us some time?
So I probably made, when I gave those 5, I probably made an assumption based on the formality of my 2 examples, whether it was the board meeting or the team meeting, where someone is the designated leader. They're already the leader by definition. So if you're the team leader or the production manager, whatever the title is, someone's been designated. If you're on a board, you might be the chairman of the board, whatever that might be. But just in case that's not clear, I think the answer is someone should always be the nominated facilitator of this meeting. It's clear who's in charge of it. They then are managing the clock. They have set a sense of how much time should each of these things take. And I think really great teams. I don't know if you've ever followed the EOS model, the entrepreneurial operating system, but this is
No.
just a great model for this, where they walk through the 10 elements of a really successful meeting. And by elements, I mean they literally like break down the agenda into these 10 things that they just, you know, tell you like schedule and structure your meetings this way, and they'll always be great. And one of those is times. Like this topic, we have 5 minutes for this topic. That
Mhm.
topic, we have 10 minutes for that topic. And so whoever's the facilitator is managing that. And they say it as we enter the topic. Hey guys, we have 10 minutes for this topic. So let's make sure we stay focused. If someone in the meeting starts to take the rabbit trail, they're quick to say, Kathryn, I love where you're going with this. Let's pick that up outside of the meeting, but we need to keep moving because we've got to get to these other 3 topics. And then maybe you and I can have that conversation offline, or we'll grab Kim and Charlie and the 4 of us will go peel off for a cup of coffee because I think it's a great topic. That facilitator has to take control of keeping that clock on time.
And that being said, I think sometimes that happens when people feel like they have extra time in a meeting to ramble. So what do you think is the ideal length for a meeting? I teach CE classes, and I've learned over time that anything more than an hour, people can drift. And board meetings, they sometimes need to be longer, and 2 hours or
Mhm.
3 hours can be okay.
Mhm.
But what do you feel like is a good length of time to shoot for? And I know it depends on the meeting, but
Yeah.
at the same time, I do think that there's some attention that people need to think through as far as who their audience is and how long they can pay attention for.
So not only do I agree with this, I really passionately agree with this. And I think the best Examples I can give you are going to draw from some learning I had probably 20 years ago from Patrick Lencioni, who's a great thought leader, and had broken this concept of meetings down by using an illustration of the way we consume entertainment content. And his example was simply this. There are some meetings we need to have that are like the weekly sitcom. Okay, so the weekly sitcom, back when Seinfeld was popular, this was a great example. But there are others. And you need the content for the weekly sitcom to fit within a 30-minute segment, which also has the buffers of the lead in, the out, and some commercial space in between. It's probably really 20 minutes of content for a 30-minute show. So when we have these regular meetings, like we gave the example of earlier, think of them like the weekly sitcom. They need to fit within a tight time frame. So try to keep those in the 20-minute range, 30 max. When we need to have a little bit more strategic meeting, the first one might be more tactical. This one's going to be a little more strategic. This might be when we're reviewing our monthly numbers or our quarterly business review. That might be a little bit more like when you look at television, you see these drama series where it's more like an hour of content. It's not the weekly version of the sitcom. It's now the hourly drama where we really unpack a storyline and go a little further. So when we need to be more strategic, think like that and schedule an hour for that meeting and use that. Again, hour is maximum. That's the parameter of it. On TV, you never turned on NBC and 5 minutes after the hour, hey, we're still wrapping up the previous show. We'll get to the no, that doesn't happen. It lands on time. So that's how you do it. And then the third type he unpacked, which I really loved, is and occasionally we really need to do long-term planning. This is where we need to get the team to do an offsite. This could be the annual planning process or the strategic 5-year plan kind of thing. We go to a retreat. Well, this is like going to the movies. This is now an event. We go out. We schedule time to get there and to get back. We know there's going to be some food involved because it takes a little more time. So we got to get some popcorn. And so that could be a longer format. But think about most of the cinema that you watch. If you really took out the previews and the trailers at the beginning and then at the end, all of the credits that they roll, you're probably looking at about 90 minutes of content. And if it's a really, really good story, maybe 2 hours max. So I think you just said it. It's also why most of our college classes are limited to 90 minutes because our brains just can't hold attention much longer than that. So that's my definition of that answer is figure out which are your tactical meetings, keep those in the 20 to 30-minute range. Which of your meetings are strategic, keep those more like in the 50 minutes to an hour range. And then when we really need to do deep dive planning, yeah, maybe you go off site and keep that to 90 minutes to 2 hours. That will help a lot because you've sorted your meetings into one of those slots. And by the way, when I say quarterly, like don't do those long-term meetings every week. Make them monthly or quarterly, and that'll help separate the space that you need.
And I think one thing that's helpful is if you use meetings as a way to limit distractions. So I think they can be used as a really good tool, such as a pipeline meeting. Let's talk about that tomorrow at our pipeline meeting. I'm not going to dive into the file right now. Let's talk about that tomorrow at our pipeline meeting. So it can really put boundaries on things at all of those meetings. So I think there's ways to make it be effective so that you feel like you're using the meeting to save time elsewhere.
You bring up a great example, and this will happen. So let's say, your example of, hey, we'll do that tomorrow in the pipeline meeting. Now we're in the pipeline meeting. But someone says the reason we're behind on this file is something is wrong in our process. We are not functioning optimally, and that's why we're late on this thing in the pipeline meeting. It's really important to say, okay, let's put that on an agenda for our monthly strategy meeting. We need to take more time to dig into that topic. We need to do some research. We're not going to fix it right here during the pipeline meeting, but boy, is it noted that that's something we need to address. We've got a fly in the ointment. So I think you are right. It can help set the boundaries for the meetings themselves. They can also help us set the agendas for the other types of meetings we should be having.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I want to bring this up because I think it's important. If I'm going to go to a 2.5 hour long movie, it better be fun. it better be captivating. So, are there ways to make a meeting fun or captivating? Any tips around that for people?
Well, your comment is really appreciated. I think some of it is going to depend upon the purpose of the meeting. If our business is under duress, like we literally are struggling to figure out how to make a profit, and we're going on the third quarter in a row where we're not making profit, I'm not sure how to make that meeting fun.
Right.
I'm just being honest about that. I'm not sure how to make it fun, but maybe what I wouldn't do is I might understand we're already under stress. So don't make the meeting unnecessarily painful. And so the things I might do in that meeting might be more like stress relief rather than entertainment. If I make it entertaining while someone is sitting there thinking, really, we're doing a painting
Right.
project to blow some steam and we're losing, $10 million a quarter, like that's a disconnect. So I think context really does matter. So if the purpose of the meeting is in a context where we're struggling, then maybe what we do is just provide some stress relief. Let's do some things like, hey, schedule a walk break. Like we're gonna all, hey, for the next 15 minutes, we're gonna take this one out, pick somebody to walk with. Here's the topic. Let's talk about it, and then we'll all gather back in the room. I wouldn't call that fun, but it definitely is better than just sitting there and staring at you know, the PowerPoint for 2 hours. So your comment is really well appreciated as we have to ask ourselves, what are the ways we can take the cadence of a longer format meeting and break it up so that we keep people engaged. On the flip side, yeah, if we're celebrating what we're doing, because we're doing really well. And so the purpose of this meeting and review is how do we take the momentum we've built and do something even better? By all means, add something fun, maybe a service project that gets the team engaged in a different way where we're focused on someone else. Maybe it's, we're going to go explore something in our local city that opens all of our eyes to, oh my gosh, this is an experience we didn't know existed, and it's right here in our backyard. Team building activities. We're gonna create something together. One of my favorite team building activities we ever did was at a winery where we all learned how to blend wine together and create things that paired with food. And those things can really be fun and help make a longer format meeting more enjoyable.
I think even something simple like, hey, everybody write down one thing that you love about where we work or one thing that you love about a coworker.
Mm.
And let's start with that. Or let's do that in the middle just to kind of bring back the focus a little bit. So I think that there can be ways to break it up that make it so it's not so methodical that might now obviously if you do that in the middle of we've lost $10 million that might be tough, but you could maybe start with that of, hey, I know it's been a really hard quarter, let's talk about some people who worked really hard this quarter and the difference that they've made in these numbers, and then we'll dive into some solutions to where we're at.
Great examples there. So when you think through, we said earlier, create an agenda that is consistent. If we're doing our monthly or our quarterly review meetings, celebrations should always be an agenda item. You can
Mhm.
always find something to celebrate because even when our financials are in a tough spot, somebody's working their tail off to try to correct that, and you can highlight that person, and you can really bring
Mhm.
some counterbalance to the stress by saying, "Hey, but look at Kathryn. She is really crushing this." I think that's a really great example. You know what else is fun in a meeting is
Mm.
when we've scheduled a 30-minute meeting and we cover everything in 20 minutes and we tell people, "Hey, good news. Here's 10 minutes of your life back." I've never met anyone who's like, "No, we said we were going to be for 30 minutes. Let's just hang out for another 10 minutes." Look, if you want to hang out because that's just what you want to do
Mhm.
casually, awesome. But most people love someone who leads a meeting so tight that it ends early. There is just never anybody who gets bummed out about that.
Oh, yeah. And it's okay to give yourself the permission to say, great, we're done. I don't need to keep you longer than I need to keep you.
Well said. Well said. Are there any other, as you think back to your experience with meetings, are there any other things you've learned over the years that you think, yeah, that might not be the classic framing of a meeting, like the purpose or the agenda, but it's one of those little things that has always been an ingredient to a successful meeting. What's been the ingredient in your mind to a successful meeting?
So there's a book that I love that I loan out a lot, Lean In, right? Sheryl Sandberg.
I
So
remember her. Yeah, sure.
yeah.
From Facebook.
So one of the things that I keep in my mind as I head into a meeting or I lead a meeting is sit at the table and bring others to the table. So, hey, Michael, I haven't heard from you yet at this meeting. What are your thoughts? You've been pretty quiet. I want to hear what you're thinking. Or, hey, uh, Michael, we've heard from you a lot. I'm going to ask a few other people what they think of this topic, because I think that in a meeting, you have quiet people and you have loud people. And it's not that they don't have good ideas. It's just they might not have found the space to interject, because some people need 30 seconds before they'll throw their voice in, and some people need 1/2 of a second before they're going to speak up. So I think it's pulling the people's thoughts. If you really want to have a productive meeting, include the people that are there. And I think that's always really important to me when I attend a meeting and when I run a meeting.
I like that a lot. That's really good. Yeah, I definitely remember the book. It's funny. There was a while where that I accidentally started adopting her phrase. That was my signature for a while. Lean in. Here's one that I've tried to be in the habit of as well. Anytime I'm attending a meeting, so I'm not the one hosting or I'm not the one facilitating, I always try to bring a notebook and I try to take notes, even if my notes, if you sat and looked at them, are not a lot more detailed than the agenda itself or who's in the room. That might be literally what I've written down as I'm writing the names down of who was here, or I'm highlighting the things that were on the agenda. But what I'm doing is I'm showing respect to everyone in the room, that I'm attempting to engage with the information that we have. Hopefully, the notes I have are actually rich and robust. But my point of the comment is, even if I'm sitting here thinking, okay, there's not much to do, the reason I do this is it limits the risk that I grab a phone or a laptop and appear to be disconnected. I think you and I have sat in some meetings together, especially at some of our round tables, where someone maybe with good intentions has their laptop up to take notes, but before you know it, you look over and they've opened up a different screen and now they're checking email or they're checking on a pipeline problem. And that emotional value in that room shifts because you realize that person's disconnected. So I try really hard to just bring a notebook and take notes so that I can show respect for the person who's trying to host that meeting.
That's great. And I think that the other people in the meeting get frustrated by that too, because they can get distracted by the person getting distracted.
Well said. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. So at the end of the day, that comes back, I think, to the facilitator. The facilitator has a responsibility, let's say an opportunity. If it's in a team context, maybe a responsibility, but at a minimum, an opportunity to keep that meeting flowing. No meeting is perfect. No, if you host enough meetings, you're going to leave some and you're like, that was great. And you're going to leave some thinking, why was I even here? If we can minimize the why was I even here, because we've put some simple structure around these things, like some of the tips we've rattled on today, I think your experience with meetings move from, okay, we don't have to have a meeting for everything, but the ones we do have, they matter. And I look forward to them. That's my hope. And I hope that's what some of our listeners got out of our review today.
A meeting doesn't have to be a 4-letter word.
Fair enough.
So there you go.
Fair enough. All right, Kathryn. Well, you take us home. I think if we are looking forward to future episodes, we will glean from our own advice from today's episode, and we will do our best to be prepared, keep everybody on time, and do our best to have a really clear agenda.
So today we went through how to have effective meetings and heard all about that from both of us on what you should do as far as agenda, some things to keep in mind when you're setting up the meeting, lengths of time. Hopefully this was really helpful for you in setting your own meetings to make your own day more productive. Thanks so much for joining us today on Building Bigger Lives. Thanks, Michael, for being here.
Always happy to be with you, Kathryn.